I don't think that we necessarily have to completely purge the original government and replace it with all new people. On the other hand, I do have to say that a proper government is not really, it does not really have that many important functions. A proper government should be able to be a complete bungling mess for at least some period of time, and not really affect the people too badly, because as long as the people are left free and there's some system of courts and police for them to redress their grievances to, then the government shouldn't matter how bungling the government is. Again, eventually the police and courts would become better and work better. But it's not like if the government was running the road system and the schools and the hospitals and whatever else, and you had a bungling government, that would be a disaster. But that's not the type of government I advocate setting up. So, should you keep supposedly knowledgeable, educated personnel from the previous government who know what's going on? I don't think that's too important. I don't think it's a problem if you don't, in case-to-case analysis, if you don't see it as a real problem, to let them stay on fine. I mean, look at what we did with Nuremberg, the judgment at Nuremberg, the trials at Nuremberg. That's a great movie, Judgment at Nuremberg. We tried and hanged people. Hanged, I'm sure it is. And that's an option. When we took over Japan, we let them keep their emperor system. I think they still have an emperor today. I'm not certain of that. If they do, it's completely unimportant. But those are options. Maybe it was in poor taste to let them keep their emperor. I don't know. But those are not particularly essential because the government that we set up should not have that much power. This I'll mention very quickly as a side note. I'll mention the issue of voting. People say, go out and vote, you have a right to vote, you have a duty to vote, some people say. Well, if the government's simply there to protect your rights, why do you have to rush to the ballot box every 2 years for your congressional elections, and every 6 years for your senators, and every 4 years for president? As if you don't go and vote, some horrendous evil will descend upon you. And maybe it will, but the point is that a government should be such that 90% of the voters can stay home, 10% of the voters can choose who gets elected, and it should not matter that much anyway. Whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in Congress, they should not have the power to forcibly tax the citizens, to go to war without the approval of the legislature and stuff. It should be very difficult for the legislature to go to war, and I'm sure that in a proper society, opinion polls and stuff would be an important thing, and newspaper and editorials and stuff would be taken account of by the government. So it is not essential that you go and vote to keep yourself free. The society, the government should be set up in such a way that freedom is a given, and that you have the right to go vote if you think it's important in this election. You shouldn't have to go vote to protect your rights every single election. Similarly, the governments that we set up in countries we take over should not be that powerful. They should just be on the sidelines. So, let's go to the next section of what I have here. We're going to go now to a quote from Jim's second video, Transition to Republican Government in Louisiana, number 1 of 2. 3 minutes and 15 seconds, Jim says, quote, Jefferson himself said that his new fellow citizens were as yet incapable of self-government as children, end quote. I don't know what time period Jefferson had in mind for these children to be brought up into a more reasonable system. One thing that I have reservations about is what kind of a system would you trust the government to set up to educate people about freedom and rights and stuff. That seems improbable to me, but I'm willing, like I said, to put out some pamphlets and videos on what jury systems are and stuff. But most of all, I would counter by saying, if he had in mind a period of say more than 5 years for this transition to get to a free society. If that's what the debate is, I think if it's 5 years or less, I couldn't debate. Okay, they do need to learn a few things. Let's give them a copy of our Constitution and teach them how to use it for the next 5 years. Okay. But if he's saying something longer than 5 years, 10, 20 years for this society to learn the ways of freedom, I would say that Jefferson would change his statement. I say he would do an about-face on this if he could see the completely destroyed, servile and prostrate people of Japan and Germany rise to become economic superpowers in the space of 10 or 20 years. Or 30, maybe. But to rise up out of the ashes of complete servility and tyranny. Utter tyranny in those societies. And you go there in the 1950s and you don't have despotic, servile people. And in the 70s you've got extraordinary wealth. And in the 90s you've got the second and third largest economies on the planet. So I think that if we are to be informed by history, as Jim mentions at the first of his video on post-war occupation policies, he says, I think these videos weren't informed by history. I think if we were informed by history, we would have to recognize that completely servile people can be brought to a state of self-governing freedom. Not that I say that we should take our troops out of their countries. I'm actually comfortable with the vast expense of keeping them there. Unless we come up with something else. I'm not completely against withdrawing either and just keeping bullets aimed at the missiles and say, don't you mess up again. We fixed you once and we'll fix you again, so don't try it. Either way I'm fine with. But to let them choose some way of governing themselves is absolutely out of the question. I think we have to give them our system, our Constitution. Fine, teach them what a jury is. Teach them about it. Okay. Now, I want to bring in at this point a quote from Ayn Rand. I don't have the quote with me, but I have it almost verbatim on in my memory. It was the question of dictatorships and where does Hitler come from and where does Stalin come from and how do they rise to power and stuff. And Ayn Rand says that Hitler was not this genius. He did not just come into a perfectly reasonable country. There's some reason that the country fell into servility. This is a point that Jim makes. It's not just out of nowhere that the country accepts a leader like Hitler. But the point that Ayn Rand makes is that when that opportunity arises, when the people are ready for a dictator, Ayn Rand says the people who want those positions can smell it. They'll crawl out from under rocks. They'll come. They'll materialize. They will be there. And they will try to take advantage of the situation. Well, I want to suggest that the opposite is true. That's a malevolent view of humanity, and that's a true view. That's true. There will always be some quisling who will do the nastiest thing that no one thought was possible. And there will always be Nazis in the middle of the land of poets and philosophers. You'll always be able to find people who will put people in gas chambers and burn them and stuff. On the other hand, if a good system gets set up, if a system that rewards virtue and operates on virtue and requires honesty and rewards upstanding and honest citizenry, if that sort of a system gets set in place, I believe that the men who are virtuous and good have the potential for crawling out from under the rocks, except for that's not the metaphor, that's not the direction I want to take it, coming out from the woodwork or whatever.